All right, officially welcome to our summer learning series from Perkins School for the Blind and College Success at Perkins. This is focusing on students with vision loss, college, and transition. Today's topic is supporting students to develop the skills they need for 2022 and beyond. We are so happy you're here today. As you have seen, we are recording this session and we'll send it both to the participants today as well as to the other folks who have registered, and eventually this will migrate to a resource on our website, and we'll let you know when that happens as well. So we're delighted that you're here today, and we're going to get started here in just a moment. All right. So today, what I want to do is welcome you all to have a discussion, but we are having to acknowledge in the context of this discussion the broad range of folks that have an interest in this topic. And while we designed this program for teachers with the visually impaired and other related service providers working in the K-12 system, we have found a very significant audience with a lot of you folks acknowledging your Alliance in Higher Education in the chat, and we're just thrilled about that for so many reasons, because we're also creating materials that are going to help you better serve the students that you are with and working with. But we just wanted to acknowledge that this is going to be marvelous boots on the ground material that will really help you understand the complexity of educating students with vision loss, and to really respond to them in, I think, more insightful ways than you may have even realized. So without further ado, I'm going to make some opening comments, introduce you to the gang here, and we're going to get going. So here's some of the thinking that we put into our design of this series. We know that for teachers with the visually impaired out there, it's hard to translate research and big ideas into quick curriculum for a student you might be working with in college, as you're sitting in your car seat and you're trying to design the next lesson plan for a 9th or 10th grader who wants to attend college. So we developed the series to really provide innovative ideas and current resources for you all. And for the folks in disability resource offices working to create an interactive program for your student and to develop some accommodations that are appropriate for them, this may give you some insights as to why things may or may not feel quite as you might have imagined them to be. We're moved in all of this work by a grim statistic that those of you who work with me have heard before, but generally it's understood that of the students with vision loss who aspire to attend college and enroll in college, only about 60% of those students who enroll in college actually complete a degree. So that is a significant loss of human potential, their earning potential, their sense of efficacy in the world. And we are really moved to reduce that number of folks dropping out by giving them more information. The reasons for some of these numbers are super complex, and we'll explore a few of them today. But we're very clear in the research and work that we've done here in College Success at Perkins and with the professionals that we have on this call that some of the reason is because there is low information out there, both for students making possibly poorly informed decisions about what their transition plans are, because there's a lack of support in their schools. Teachers of the visually impaired, we know, are often stretched beyond both their knowledge base and their capacity by high student loads and right now staffing shortages in the field. We also know that high schools are lacking school counselors that can provide more adequate and appropriate transition and college counseling. And we know on the state level, because this is a very complex system these students are working with, the vocational rehabilitation commissions and bureaus within each state vary in their knowledge base and the structures that they have to support students, and they often don't have a lot of time with students to do the kind of one-on-one counseling that's required to provide better outcomes, both from a student knowing themselves better and from a knowing the resources and tools out there to create better outcomes. So on that note, our first session in this 4-part learning series addressed some of that, in that we looked at the state of college right now. Colleges look very different than they did certainly 35 years ago when I was in college, but as the world has evolved, programs have evolved along with it. And I will talk a little bit more about them in my comments later in this presentation, but if you have not already done so, we encourage you to watch that session. It's a really marvelous session, and it really sets the stage for some of the conversation that we're going to have today. We'll review the ones coming up later on, but a quick hint, the next program on July 10th will be focused on programs that inspire, programs that bridge this gap between high school and college, that are taking current research and recognizing the skill gaps and creating programming that supports students as they're exploring what their next step might be, utilizing some of the ideas that we're talking about today. So checking my notes to make sure I am covering all the things I want to do. So, but today we're really focused on developing tools and to recognize that the demands on young people today and the skills they need to meet those demands efficiently and effectively are intense. And for our students with vision impairment, developing these skills and self-awareness can be quite difficult. It takes a lot of time and very intentional, repeated instruction to learn these skills because they require multiple layers of understanding, insight, persistence, tolerance of frustration, and practice in real life classes. And we see often that doesn't happen as frequently as we might want. We've also learned that that our students may not be aware of the resources and tools available to them. And for those of you from higher education on this call right now, that may be part of what you've experienced if you're working with a student with vision loss, that they may not be aware of the broad range of screen reading resources and audio books and even resources on their iPhones that may help them achieve their goals in higher education. So that's just a dipping our toe in the water of this. But right now, what I'd like to do is introduce you to our panelists. You've had the pleasure of viewing their lovely images on our screen. But first, I'd like to introduce briefly, Diane will be our first speaker. She is a certified orientation and mobility instructor and an accessibility consultant who also manages the Paths to Technology blog, a robust resource that we will link you to in our follow-up materials. We also have Conchita Hernandez, who's a statewide blind and low vision specialist in the state of Maryland, and just a remarkable speaker. She'll be speaking about English language learners and first generation challenges for our students with vision impairment. We have Janet Saka, who's a TVI here in the state of Massachusetts, who brings really marvelous creative solutions to some of the challenges I've articulated. Looking at fifth-year programs, ways to design that within the secondary structure, and other ways to structure gap year programs, among many other things. So she's, like I said, a super creative problem solver. And in addition to that, you've seen Annie Tolkien chatting with you in the chat. I'd like to have her introduce herself now. She's my partner in crime as we're thinking up these summer learning series. And when you hear her introduce herself, you'll understand why she's a marvelous partner in this planning. So Annie, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Tolkien. I'm the founder and director of Accessible College. At Accessible College, I support students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions with the transition to college. And I've been working with Leslie and the Perkins School on the College Readiness resource site, and we'll make sure to drop that in the chat so everybody can check that out. And the site has a number of resources and articles for students, for families, for educators, really focused on college transition for blind and visually impaired students. And my background, like many of you today who are on the webinar, is in college disability support, I was the associate director of Georgetown University's Disability Support Office for over 5 years. And since there are a number of folks on here who are from the college side, I just want to kind of reiterate the fact that I think this topic is really, really important for college folks in particular, because it'll help kind of orient you to the current state of education and preparation for students with vision loss, and also the complexity of the needs of these students. And it'll give you an overview of the path forward, along with some tools that'll hopefully be helpful when you're engaging with students. And I know a number of people in the college side also connect with high school students who are preparing for transition or work in community colleges as well. And so hopefully you'll get some great tools and tips today. And with that, I will hand it back over to Leslie.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. I think that explains why we're thrilled to have Annie as part of this team. So what I'd like to do is give a little bit of context, and this may be especially helpful. Thank you, Cynthia, for our college side folks to understand why we have such a challenge with this population. To give you some context of what I do as Director of College Success at Perkins and a Compass coach. College Success is a national initiative Perkins launched about 6-ish years ago to explore that that statistic I shared with you earlier, the 60% dropout rate for students with vision loss. They did a national study. They created a direct service program that was residential, working with students 18 to 22. I ran that program for 2 years. The pandemic stopped that program, but we learned a lot in working with the 13 students who went through the program. We then pivoted quickly to a virtual program for a younger cohort for students in grade 9 through 12 called Compass. And we, one of my wonderful colleagues will drop that in the chat. Compass is a 9-month virtual program for students grade 9 through 12, their parent, and their educators, so a TVI. We learned in running our residential program that it was too late by the time students had graduated from high school. It's not like a permanent too late, but it's very challenging to teach the levels of skills our students were needing to fill, to meet their desired outcome of attending college and receiving a degree. They were missing basic foundational skills that you'll explore a bit with Diane here in just a moment. And we really felt the need to pivot younger and also take a more holistic approach. That was because parents were also operating from a low information standpoint in many cases. They had little support for understanding what skill development looked like for their student who was aspiring to attend college, but may not have had the requisite experience in high school to necessarily gain the independence, problem solving, and maturity that's required to meet the demands of college as it's structured. And we'll explain that a little bit. So we've been working with students for 4 years in a pretty intense way. We have 32 graduates from those 2 programs at this point, and we're continuing on running our Compass program as well. So if you know any students who may benefit from that program, by all means, send us a line. We're also exploring the possibility of creating a program similar to that for college-age students, because there's just a need to coach these students through some of the challenges that they encounter, both with the decentralized, siloed support system once they graduate from high school, and in terms of recognizing their own strengths and areas for growth, or simply challenges. So a few other things to highlight that we've noticed is that there is a real gap in discussing with our current high school students the difference between high school expectations and the legal framework for high school support that's very adult driven, and the expectations driven by the ADA on the college side that so many on this call are familiar with. There's very little, there are many state transition groups, Tennessee being one of them, really doing some nice work, creating meaningful documents and charts and things like that. But on a day-to-day basis, unpacking what the consequences are, there's some significant gaps. And so part of what's going on today is us exploring how to bridge those gaps. Other things that we have discovered is that the system is not really up to date with what's going on in higher education, which is, there's some really terrific stuff going on in higher education right now. The creation of new programs that allow for students who may not have necessarily had access to a college experience with or without a degree as an outcome prior to maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Federal legislation dictates some of this, demographic changes dictate some of this, and a variety of other things, but there's a lack of understanding within the system. And when you don't have a college counselor who's a pro at this, really guiding a student with unique needs, we can really see students getting into college because they have straight A's, because of just chronic grade inflation, reduced expectations and reduced output for students, and a mismatch in terms of college admissions and enrollment in colleges that may not necessarily be meeting a student's real needs. So let's move on to the next slide, Cynthia. All right. The other things I wanted to point out here are something that's become very clear as a person who's been in the field for over 30 years is that some of the social pressures, both on students and on families, to have an answer for what you're going to do after high school can be quite profound, as I'm sure some of you have seen in your offices, both on the high school side and the college side. And so we will really be, we really are working to help our students understand, just like for all students, that there's no rush to go to college, but creating an intentional plan that acknowledges strengths and challenges can really empower a student and move that locus of control into the student and not the adults who are so used to perhaps being engaged with the IEP process and making sure a student meets with, air quotes, success in high school. That some of this long-term planning that you will hear all of our presenters talking about may really lead to better outcomes and more informed decision-making about how a student can meet their goals after high school. So we hope, I could go on and on about this material. Cynthia, I think we'll power through the next slide, and there we go. Oh, the one final comment I will make, though, is another trend that we have noticed in our work in College Success and Compass has been a real gap in addressing secondary diagnoses, and for many, many different complex reasons. But secondary diagnoses may be things like learning differences, processing, whether it be auditory processing or other processing challenges, ADHD, autism spectrum, a variety of things that may impact a student's learning more really than their vision loss. And the system struggles to do a yes and approach for our students with vision loss. They're often just, many of the challenges students may have in learning are just simply attributed to vision impairment and not really unpacked with the level of nuance and detail that much of the research really tells us may be more operating for an individual student. I will leave it at that, but I encourage us to think more broadly about how students learn. What are the different things that are impeding them besides simply the vision loss? The final thing I'll address is I just attended a marvelous conference on cortical visual impairment, and it's very important for us to consider that vision impairment may be ocularly based, that is the mechanisms within the eye, but it may also be brain based. And those are new and complex concepts that I encourage you to go explore CVI Now, which is a marvelous, super rich resource that Perkins supports as well. And if you have a student working with CVI, to reach out to us so that we can support you in getting additional resources for them and you as they move into their goals. So without further ado, I'm checking the clock and I'm behind schedule already. I am going to hand the baton over to my colleague, Diane. Are you ready?
Okay, thank you, Leslie.
Awesome.
All right, so I want to just mention very quickly that it used to be that we expected our students to master technology by middle school or high school. Now we're looking at technology. Kids are entering kindergarten with tech skills. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, Cynthia. There we go. So some of our tech skill milestones, there are two driving forces behind acquiring tech skills early. And those two forces are in kindergarten. And that's because students with vision are entering kindergarten with tech skills. They're efficient on a tablet or a smartphone, and they're able to open up apps, and they have all this exposure to educational apps before they enter kindergarten. The second really big driving force here in the United States is mastery of tech skills by third grade. And that's due to the high stakes assessments that are taken online in third grade. And then we have a couple other milestones we have to think about, and that's high school. And the students in high school need to be able to convert materials. They need to have advocacy. They need to be able to talk to their teachers and explain what it is they need, what is accessible for them, what is not. And they also need to be totally independent. And then we look at all the skills that are required in college and career. Okay, let's go ahead and slide to the next slide, please. All right, so the question is, does one size fits all when you come to technology? And really, it is not about one device. It's about various tasks require various devices. So students need to be proficient on multiple devices and know when to use which device. If you think about it, if you're texting, it's going to be a smartphone. If you're being introduced to technology, if you're introducing a young student to technology, it's probably going to be a touch screen, either a tablet or a smartphone. If you're traveling and using GPS, you're going to use a smartphone. If you're writing a research paper, you're going to want a computer. And of course, digital math can encompass all kinds of things like a Braille note taker or a computer and higher levels of applications that you're using in order to access that digital math. Right. Let's take a look at the next screen. Here we go. On this screen, there's an image of a 4-year-old. Her name is Layla. She's smiling as she's sitting at her preschool desk, and she has her hands on a Braille display, which is paired with an iPad. And Layla is learning her Braille letters with the Exploring Braille and Madeline and Ruff app. So I want to talk a little bit about device progression. Now remember, we just talked about we need to know all these different devices and be efficient with all these devices to be successful in college and beyond. But we're going to start with a touchscreen device, such as a tablet for preschoolers, and that needs to be paired with a refreshable Braille display or a Bluetooth keyboard. Our students are going to need to be introduced to a computer and be pretty well proficient on a computer before they enter middle school. The students need to understand how to use a smartphone, and quite often our parents set the parameters for smartphones. Typically, our students are receiving the smartphone in middle school. This is really critical for social things, for O&M, for personal use. And then again, the Braille takers, and for doing some of the math. Okay, next slide. So we've all heard about that phrase, you learn to read until third grade, and you read to learn. After third grade, you read to learn. The same is really true for technology. You're going to learn to access technology until third grade. And after third grade, you're going to use technology to access learning. Remember, third grade, our students should have mastered their tech by third grade. I do strongly believe that many students with low vision have tech needs that are often overlooked, specifically low vision students with slow reading speeds who would benefit from using a screen reader. Be sure to check out some of the past technology posts about reading rates and statistics and 600 words per minute series on how to get reading faster using auditory. And also there's a great post on indicators for screen readers. All right, next slide. Since I was asked to talk today about tech for preschool and early elementary, let's take a quick look at the National Tech Standards. And on the screen, we have the National Tech Standards scope and sequence. And again, this is all by 3rd grade. The students should know how to keyboard. They should know how to word processing, such as editing, proofreading, formatting, copy and paste, alt text, all kinds of formatting, word processing skills. They should know how to do spreadsheets. They should know about tables and charts and graphs. Students by 3rd grade should know about multimedia and presentation tools, including slideshows, how to create them and how to use them, how to navigate through them. They should know how to research and gather information from the internet. And they should know how to communicate well and use collaboration tools. All right, next slide. So how can we help students, including college students, build these concepts? We have a lot of students that have gaps in their concepts, especially when it comes to digital concepts. I'm a firm believer on using tactile graphics. I'm all about Braille and tactile graphics. I think students learn to read with their eyes or their fingertips first before they move on to the digital skills. So on the screen is a simple preschool tracing worksheet with 4 different wavy lines and pointed, wavy or pointed lines. The lines go left to right, and then they end up at 4 kinds of ice cream: an ice cream bar on a stick, 3 scoops in a waffle cone, 1 scoop in a sugar cone, or maybe a soft serve twisted ice cream cone. So not only do the students need to learn to tactily follow or trace different types of lines, and they can learn all the vocabulary for a wavy line, a pointed line, and the different types of lines, moving left to right for reading progression, including for Braille reading. But then also they need to be exposed to graphics literacy. And even though I have an idea in my mind what a graphic for an ice cream cone might look like, this worksheet has 4 different graphics and they all represent ice cream cones and they look very different from each other. So we want to make sure that our students are introduced really early to a lot of tactile graphics to help build concepts that they'll use when they're doing digital materials. So let's take a look here. It says tactile graphics for tech. I like to use tactile graphic overlays for my iPad or my tablet. Those overlays might show what the screen is showing. So it might be the home screen with the various apps on the home screen and how that's laid out. It might be a PowerPoint presentation showing the thumbnails on the left-hand side, the main canvas in the middle. It might be any type of tactile graphic that will help explain what the layout is on the screen or to build the concepts of things that are being shown on the screen. It's really important when you start getting into higher math and it's digital math that the students have those tactile concepts before they try to interpret what's on the screen. Okay, and I also use tech to create my tactile graphics. So my go-to for creating quick and easy tactile graphics, and these tactile graphics can be overlays or they can be just standalone tactile graphics. My go-to is using a Piaf or a Swell machine, using the Good Notes app, and a pen on my tablet with the Good Notes app. I also like to grab resources that are online that I can just simply print out on my Piaf or my Swell machine. So I don't have to create everything myself. I just have to know where these online resource libraries are in order to grab these different materials. Okay, next slide. So I want to talk just a minute about a couple of resources. Leslie had asked that we give some resources, our hot tips on where to find things. So the first thing I'd like to share is the link to the Paths to Technology website. This website has thousands of posts literally on technology and lessons and information that can be used immediately for your students. I also want to have a link, and these posts that I'm linking to here are all on Passive Technology. I just want to share a couple specific posts. One of them is the National Tech Standards Scope and Sequence series. There's a whole series on this, and one of the pieces that goes along with it is the AT, the Assistive Technology skills scope and sequence that align with the national tech standards, and it includes links to lessons to teach the different things within the AT technology scope and sequence. There's also a section on Passive Technology that is specifically for early intervention in kindergarten. There's lessons for early intervention, there's tech skills, there's apps, there's the ABCs of iOS, a voiceover manual. How do you introduce a preschooler to voiceover on an iPad? There's concept development and lots more under that early intervention in kindergarten section. There's also a tactile graphics series on there about how to create tactile graphics, lessons with tactile graphics, tactile graphic library. There's a whole library on Passive Technology that has tactile graphics that you can literally just print off and run through a tactile graphic machine, and then have your raised tactile graphic and a lesson that goes along with it. All right, so back to you, Leslie.
Awesome. Thank you. So we are ready to move on to Conchita. And are you ready, Conchita?
Yep, I am.
All right, we'll stop sharing on this screen and have you share your screen.
And it won't let me, oh, there we go. Okay, it is letting me. Perfect. Hello, everyone. And actually, Leslie, would you mind putting the PowerPoint in the chat, or hold on, because it just closed down on me.
Oh no, okay.
Let me grab it again.
Okay, this is the joys of Zoom. We've got it.
So as we kind of, as I pull it up again, so I'm going to be talking about English learners, and one of the barriers with kind of working with English learners is that students that are blind or low vision, that are English learners, a lot of times don't have an expert that understands the duality of both of it. So TVIs across the country are very clear that we're not being taught this in our teacher prep programs, and they know the vision, aspects. However, the English learner part, they don't know. So the same is true with teachers who are ESOL teachers. They understand the English learner part of it, but the way they were taught the English learner part of it was by images and by, very, very visual. And so they struggle to reach our students who kind of have this duality of, well, not really visual, but I still need to use these things. So I have it up and I can now share it. Yay. Okay. Perfect. So on the screen, I have an image of, actually a great resource, Disability In recently created a bunch of open sourced disability images that anyone can use as long as you give them credit. So I would recommend, if you all are looking for disability related content, Disability In has a whole page. So there's a student with a Braille note taker that is reading the Braille display at the bottom. So the three areas that I really focus on with English learners is understanding kind of the research aspect of it, understanding what does the research say, what can we do, and then how do we collaborate and work with families. So the first thing is kind of looking at the research. So a lot of data has come out recently from the federal government around the amount of English learners that are in our public schools. And we've had really, really big jumps in states that have not historically had jumps. For example, I'm from Maryland, and we've had about 140% jump in our state. And so TVIs are seeing this and really feeling like they don't know how to meet the needs of those students because they don't really have the skills or the know-how on how to work with them. So I have 3 kind of areas to work with you all on. The first one is Paths to Literacy. So Paths to Literacy is a great resource, and there's a whole section in Paths to Literacy, and I'm going to kind of show you all on English language learners. So if you go to it, it has a bunch of different articles, respecting cultures, learning new culture tactily. The one I'm really excited about to share with you all is the Consortium on Blindness in English Learners. So this Consortium on Blindness in English Learners, we created it not too long ago, and it has 3 aspects. So the research aspect is you can go to the American Foundations for the Blind page, and it's all linked within these pages. And it tells you the research that is around English learners that are blind and low vision. And it gives you practical information on, so as someone in the blindness field, what does it mean, right? Because a lot of time research remains really high level, and it's like, so, okay, that's great, you did this research. What does it mean for me in my classroom? Or what does it mean for me as a practitioner working with students, either on a college level or in rehabilitation? So you can go check that out, and there's a bunch of great information. The next one is just Paths to Literacy itself has become a platform where practitioners can submit articles on anything related to English learners. So if somebody's like, oh, I found this great app that works with a student, I found this great resource. So anyone can go in, and it pulls up kind of all the articles, and let's see if I click on it. The website recently changed, so there's a bunch of changes, but if you click on it, it will take you through all of the different articles, which are some of the ones that we saw before. And using Solemn, which is a great tool that a teacher from the Maryland School for the Blind put together on how to grade students on their English level proficiency, because a lot of times we don't have a way for our students to be graded. So this is a great resource within, but there's a lot more. There's how to work with students with O&M, how to work with students that have different needs that are English learners. And the collaboration piece. So this is the part that I'm the most excited about. One of the things that we always hear is like, I have a question, I don't know who to reach out to around this population. And it could be in rehab, in school, in post-secondary education. If I have a question around a blind or low vision English learner, who do I reach out to? And a lot of times it just ends up being like, do you know this person? Do you know this person? So we came up with a consortium that it's pretty much a Google group that you sign up for, and any question or sharing a resource, and it's collaborative. So there's a Google form that you sign up. It's some basic information, your email, your name, where you located. So when I checked it this past week, we're actually international now. So we are in multiple countries, and I think we're in 30 states. So if you are interested kind of in this population and being a part of this collaboration, feel free to sign up, and I can put all this in the chat. And now I lost my spot. There we are. Right there, perfect. And so this is just kind of a resource that you all can use. The other thing that when it comes to kind of working with this population is looking at how does a student learn another language? It is a complex system, but it's also an asset-based system. So students that are bilingual have really good skills that their brain learns to process that they can then take and use in school, in social life, in a bunch of different things. So this website here, which is Colorín Colorado, offers a bunch of information that's easy to digest, that's made specifically for educators around how students learn a language, what are best practices. It's all taken from like evidence-based. What does it say? What is it currently telling us? And so you can kind of look at all these amazing resources like classroom strategies and tips, the roles of background knowledge, there's a ton of information on here that's made for educators, and it's really simple language. And some of it is really, really helpful regardless if a student has another disability or not. And it just kind of helps all of our students. So the next one I want to talk about is when people work with families that are English language, one of the biggest barriers is communication with the families. People have a really hard time, like they won't get back to me, they didn't fill out the form, I don't really know how to communicate with them. So this idea of a communication plan is not something I came up with. It's been around for a really long time. What I did is I took kind of the best practices out there and what's recommended for English learners, and then I adapted it for our students. So when you get to this, it's a Google Doc that you can make a copy of. It won't give you editing access, but if you go to it and go to File, Make a Copy, you can make your own copy. So this kind of lays out all the best practices you can do to build that strong relationship with families, to make sure you're communicating with them, and ultimately to get the results we need. Because if we're not communicating with families and they're not aware of what's happening with the child, it's going to be really difficult to move that child in their IEP goals, in their post-secondary outcome goals, and really anything that they're doing. So it just starts out with filling out who is this communication plan for, and I put a little thing here to please make your own copy and how to do it. So the date you develop this, what's the student's name, what's the language spoken at home, and preferred mode of contact. So what I do want to say about this is, for a lot of our English learners and their families, a big preferred mode of contact is WhatsApp, because WhatsApp works without Wi-Fi. They use it a lot to communicate with their families in other countries, and they're checking it constantly all the time. So sometimes even if I text a parent, I won't get something back, but if I WhatsApp a parent, then it's like 10 seconds later, I have an answer. So make sure you communicate with the parents. What is the preferred mode of contact? And for some of them, it may be text messages, phone call. What is the way that they prefer to be communicated with? And sometimes their preferred method of communication isn't our preferred method of communication. So being really flexible about recognizing that a lot of our families that are English learners, they are in a completely new country, in a completely new culture. The way school works in the United States is very, very different than the way school works in other places. So they're really just trying to survive. And so that's why they don't turn in paperwork, they don't get back to us, they don't communicate with us as much as we would like. But they're dealing with a lot of new things. Like for example, my family's originally from Mexico. In Mexico, you just show up to the first day of school and the kid starts. Like there isn't a whole process. There's no such thing as an IEP system. There's no such thing as special education. And so all of these things are completely new for families. So make sure you figure out what is their mode of communication and who is the person you're going to be communicating with. So a lot of times, because the parents are Spanish speakers, they don't feel as confident being the point of communication. So sometimes it ends up being a family member, an older sibling who is like the one who speaks English and understands all of the information. And it can be complex because you don't want to put that information on a child. However, the parents, they have ownership over how they want that to happen. And as a school or a rehab agency, we have to be really mindful of being only in contact with one person, because they start to get really confused if you are in contact with multiple people at the school. It's like, well, who talked to you? Well, it was maybe the counselor, maybe the teacher, and the way roles work aren't even one-to-one translatable. So if it's like you told them it's like the IEP chair, that doesn't exist in other languages. And so they were like, oh, it was the person who runs the meeting. So was it the teacher? Was it who was it? Because it doesn't necessarily exist as a role for our families. So who is the one school liaison you're going to be in contact with? Who is the contact person in the household? And how often will the family be communicated? So it's very clear from the beginning, we're going to reach out to you once a week. We're going to reach out to you every other week. This is how often we're going to communicate with you. And then anything relevant to the working hours of parents. So a lot of our immigrant parents work really long hours during the day. So even if you communicate with them during the day and send something, they're not going to get back to you. So figuring out what does their hours look like? What is that? And then transportation issues. Transportation is a huge barrier for a lot of our families. So are there transportation issues? If you're inviting them to a summer program or you're inviting them, is this something that you have to take into consideration, or else they're never going to show up to the events that you're putting together? So once you've kind of met with the family and figured out what this communication plan looks like, having one place that you write everything down, because the parents will forget, the parents will be overwhelmed. And if you just be like, oh no, I can see here that, last week we talked about this, or, I see that Leslie invited you to the session last week in the log. And so then it's also a way to kind of keep our families accountable and keep ourselves accountable, that like, what is it that we actually spoke to the person? When did we speak to them? What was the outcome? And this section is on goals. So a lot of times we have amazing goals for our students, right? We want them to gain the technology skills, to gain the Braille skills, to gain the O&M skills. And they're written in such a way that it's completely foreign to parents. Something that I always say is, even if you translate an IEP into another language, it's still incomprehensible because those words don't exist in those languages. And so we're just translating things, but there's not a lot of meaning behind them. So take your goals that you have and whatever your program is. If you're in a college program like Leslie, Perkins runs, or if you're in an IEP, or if you're working with a student, whatever your role is, take a look at the goals you have for the student and make it really, really simple. Like, don't give me the 5 components and then a SMART goal. Give it to me in really simple words. So if a student is learning cardinal directions, that word doesn't exist in other languages. So what does that look like? So it may look like, student is learning north, east, south, and west. And then what can the family do to support? And something really simple. So like when the student goes outside, ask the student, what direction are you facing? When you go to the store, try to ask the student, just something that goes directly with the goal. And then any notes you want for the parent, but something that's really, really easy to understand. And something that are baby steps also, not something that's going to be like, that they're going to be overwhelmed with, how do I do this with my child? Another example is learning about self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is one of the most important parts of, getting college ready and, post-secondary ready, whatever their path may lead to. So what can a family do at home to support? They can do something simple, like let their child pick out their own clothing for the day. Something I hear a lot is, immigrant families are a lot more protective over their children. And yes, they are, because they've been through a lot. They've been through a lot of trauma. They've been through a lot of stuff to kind of get to where they are. So they are super overprotective. And a lot of other cultures are very community driven. So everything around this child, everybody wants to help, everybody wants to be a part of the solution. But a lot of times, because we make the language so inaccessible to our families and we don't really tell them in very plain language what it's all about, they don't support at home because we don't have a way to communicate that with them. So I highly encourage to kind of use this communication plan so that families can feel a part of the process and a part of communication. And I really have found that if you follow this communication plan, you have a much, much better way of communicating with families. And I've even heard from other people that are like, I use it with other families that aren't even English learners because we have a hard time communicating with them, and we found it really helps. So feel free to go into that and be a part of kind of making that communication goal. Leslie,
Awesome.
I'm not sure how much time I have left, but
You're in great shape, Conchita. That was so wonderful to see all those really concrete tools and to just, bring us present in what the lived experience is for so many different students. And we've certainly learned in College Success, and I'm sure many on the call have learned, that a more holistic approach to supporting students in that K-12 environment lead to better outcomes. But it definitely takes time to develop the systems and the communication to bring families in and to understand how they can support their child in the home environment. So I love these concrete tools. Marvelous. So what we'll do is we'll pause on questions for you right now, and I'm going to move it to Janet, and then we're going to screen share for Janet to jump in now. Cynthia's magic screen share button. And we will definitely bring in questions towards the end. There we go, Janet.
Great. Hi, I'm Janet Alexaka, and as Leslie said, I'm a teacher for students with visual impairments. I've been around for a while. I'm not going to tell you how long, but I've had a lot of experiences in graduating kids. I was just jotting down, I have in the last 10 years had 11 students go to college. So, and of those 11 that went to college, 8 have graduated and successfully graduated and gotten their degree in what they wish to get it in. And one of those 8 went on to graduate school. And I still have 1 in college and 2 in a dual enrollment program. So they're sort of doing a 5th year in high school. So that's sort of a picture of the kind of where the kids have gone. 5 of the kids that went on to college were Braille students, full Braille students. So obviously the other 6 were low vision, but 3 of those 6 were print Braille kids. So they were learning both print, they were learning in both medias as they went on. So that gives you kind of an overview of what to I have done. So if we can go on to the next slide, Cynthia, that would be great. Thank you. So Leslie asked me to speak about the 5th year program that I've done. Of those kids that have graduated, 2 did the 5th year program in their high schools. One was a Braille student and one was a student who had adventitious blindness, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's when you develop, well, usually it's a genetic condition, but not always, but you become blind later years in life, not something that you're born with. So of those 2 students, one started to lose her vision her junior year in high school, and it was not ever identified that she would be a student that would lose her vision. So it was a surprise. So she needed the 5th year, obviously, to learn all the skills of blindness and low vision. And the other student was one who came to me from after living in a foreign country for a number of years and had absolutely no computer skills and was at the junior level of high school. So we had her do a 5th year as well, just to learn the computer and technology skills that she needed to learn. She was a Braille student. So what's it all about? What is this? Why would I choose for a student to do a 5th year? So obviously I've given you a couple of scenarios. If you're a student with adventitious blindness and it comes later and you're not really prepared for that, that would be a student that I would consider keeping an extra year so that we could concentrate on those specialty skills that they're going to need to access curriculum. And maybe to venture into a dual enrollment kind of situation where they're trying out the high school. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Other students, almost all of my students have been 1st generation to college students. And so there isn't that understanding in the family of sort of the skills that are needed and the process you go through to determine where you're going to go to college and how you're going to do it. And so that those students often need a little more support, from a lot more support, I should say, from me. And it typically, I think Leslie mentioned it in one of her slides, that it typically falls on the teacher for students with visual impairments. You're the expert for that student, and the guidance counselors and other people look to the TVI to drive that, which can be hard as a TVI, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And the other one is students who may not have taken advanced courses. Maybe they're just in, college prep level courses and really aren't being challenged to the level that gives them the skills that they will need in college. So those students are also students that I look at for a 5th year program. And finally, any students that, again, Leslie, I think you mentioned it, students that might have some soft signs of other disabilities, maybe a learning difference that wasn't ever picked up because they're a Braille student, or sort of organizational time management kinds of issues. And I'm seeing a lot of kids with that kind of thing. I think also since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of kids with organizational and time management issues as well. And so right now I have my 2 students that are in high school in 5th year programs, because I think a lot was lost during that time of remote learning, although a lot was also gained in terms of skills for college. So what do I do with it? I look at a 5th year as being a time that we can do a dual enrollment with a local community college. So we reach out to the local community colleges in junior and senior year of these students' high school career, and see if there is the possibility of a dual enrollment. I'm in Massachusetts, so we have quite a few programs for that here. And generally what the student does is takes one college course. Sometimes the community colleges bring that to the high school and they take it after school. Sometimes, and they can do that in their senior year, and sometimes the student will go there, or there are options for online as well. So we look at the various options for dual enrollment. In here in Massachusetts, again, I can only speak to that. The colleges have been waiving the tuition for that first course. So that's also an enticement for parents and students as well. The big piece for the students is to continue to get some support in their high school. So, oh, I should probably give you the little technical part of that. I'm going to jump to the how. The students who are on IEPs can legally defer their graduation, they're receiving their diploma, and ask that they have this 5th year. So if they essentially refuse their diploma, even though they've earned it, they can do their senior activities, walk the walk, but they don't actually receive the diploma. It is held for a year because they're on an IEP, and they are able to use the IEP to drive that 5th year of programming. So that gives you a little idea of how to go about it. So I start to structure that in 10th and 11th grade as I see sort of the progressions of students. Maybe it's a student who isn't doing the independent work that I would expect at that level, still depending on maybe a paraprofessional to help in the classrooms, and maybe taking a reduced course load because they were trying to learn the specialized skills during this actual school day. Maybe it's a matter of maturity, absolutely just needs more time to explore the future. So there's a number of factors that falls into that, but starting early, using that IEP and planning throughout it will really be helpful. We can move to the next slide, I think. When to call in the troops. So as a TVI, I always tell people it's an impossible job. So there's so many things you have to know and learn. And I mean, if you just listen to Diane talk about technology and Conchita talk about your ELL students, you know, there's so many things you have to know. And then all the blindness skills, and then, you know, the general education requirements, and all the what we call expanded core curriculum for those of you who aren't in the blindness field. The TVI is responsible for teaching all those skills that you learn incidentally throughout life, and a blind person cannot because they're not seeing that. So it might be like nonverbal communication, or you know, at a young age, how to stand properly and have proper posture, and sit at a table and cut your food. All those things that kids pick up because they're watching all the time and learning our students have to be taught those skills directly. So we have this huge range of skills that we're also teaching beyond the general education, the access technology and the access to education, the self-determination. So it goes on and on and on. You can't do it all. So surround yourself with a team is the biggest tip I can make. If you're doing technology and you don't feel comfortable with the technology, hire an AT specialist and really go ahead and do that and have them help you learn that. Send your students to specialized programs during the summer and weekends to learn some of those skills. Develop assistive technology mentors for your kids. You know, my graduated students are happy to give out their phone numbers to my current students so that they can call and say, well, how do you make the voiceover speak by character if that's something they suddenly wanted to do and they need someone to ask quickly and they'll just text back the answer. So that's a real help as well. One of the things I've really found to be very successful that I've done is to develop programs around self-determination and social skills. So I run an after-school program once a week for kids with visual impairments at a local Y, and we do empowerment activities, we do cooking, we do the swimming, whatever, you know, we just plan every week what we're going to do. And it really, the fact that the kids are with other kids with visual impairments is really important, and they have always have 15 minutes at the end to kind of discuss all of that. And the sort of comfort level they have that everyone in that room has the same challenge. And so they're all at that, you know, same basic level is really helps develop confidence for sure. And then using a local resource such as the Y has really made a difference in that they can use their own community resources on their own rather than to go somewhere special to do these things. So I think that that's also a very nice thing that you can develop in your community. Finally, with transition's tough. It starts at age 14. It starts before that, but at 14, you really need to be concentrating on it and thinking ahead for the future and looking at what special programs are available for your students, such as the Compass program at Perkins, and also sort of job opportunities for them, because kids start working at 14, 15, 16, and you know, there's no reason our kids can't work too. So looking at that as well. We can jump to the next slide. So my hot tips. So my very number one hot tip, I've linked the Me curriculum, which is a free curriculum that's online, and it is goal setting and learning about the IEP. The various things that are done with it are self-awareness and advocacy. It's a curriculum already done. It's brilliant. It is easy for the teacher. You keep a Me notebook. Each child has a Me notebook, and they're learning about advocacy and their rights. And believe me, they will start telling their teachers what their rights are because they love that. We work on it has a whole section on improving communication skills. So like what I talked about, nonverbal, practicing all those nonverbal skills, nonverbal skills. And then sort of the whens and whys of communication, how to communicate effectively, who to share with that you have a visual impairment. I had one of my students come back to me and say, thankfully we did that, who to share with, because I went to apply for a job and I did share. And I was so glad because they said, well, let's figure out what we have to do to make it work for you. So, you know, these are the kinds of things you don't have to share, but here's some scenarios where you might want to share. So the Me curriculum is beautiful. It's 10 units. The last 4 units are high school level. So I usually start it in later elementary and do like a unit a year for a while. And then we start to ramp up by high school and do the units on your rights as a high school student, but also what happens in that new phase as a college student because it's very different. You know, it's not the same at all. So looking at your needs beyond high school, and then sort of how you go about getting those, working with an accessibility office at your college. My second share was transition resources, and I'm going to leave that one because I know that Leslie's going to talk about that. But I do use, when you listen to Leslie talk about the checklist from Perkins, I use almost just pull verbatim some of those items on the checklist to use in my IEP as benchmarks for the students. So knowing that it's already there and it's sequential, and you can really pull things from that for your IEP, and why invent the wheel when they've already figured out what kids need. So that one's there. And then finally, you know, develop your technology team. Just make sure you know the individuals and resources, because technology, those two things, technology and self-determination, I would say, are the things when I look at the students who went to college and graduated, the ones who did, all of them did really well, but the ones who really did well had high tech skills and high advocacy skills. Those two pieces I think are really important, and we really have to concentrate on those and think about them for the future. So, you know, getting to know your tech team and at your school, I know the guys here, they love it. They come in here and they love to play with the Braille note and you know, figure out why it isn't working well with Google Classroom or whatever. So you really, you know, right from the beginning, I let them come in and play with and they're fast at it. They're fast learners, and play with it and learn what the embosser's about. And then they're your advocate. Today, I just had a tech person come in to work on something on a computer. And he said, I think you need a new computer. I'll transfer everything over. And he said, and I said, well, you sure I didn't order? And he said, you get whatever you want. So it's because they know we use it and we do well with it. So you know, really work on that. That's really important. I linked a couple of things to AFB's, has great resources for low vision technology and non-visual technology. They're all there, go there. And finally, my best tech tip ever for teachers, for TVIs, this one specifically for you, is learn how to do mouselessness or windows without the mouse. You need to know what an edit box is. You need to know what a radio button is. You need to know the terms when you're teaching your kids to move around the computer, whether they're low vision or they're blind. They need to know those proper terms to know what a drop down box does, and then they need to know how to operate them. But you need to give them the right terms. And so learn that mouselessness, or that, you know, windows without the mouse. I've linked a very old little sort of, it's an article, I think, or presentation from Joan Marie Diggs. It's old, it's like, I don't know, it's probably 20 years old, but I still use it. It's excellent for, I teach other TVIs how to, you know, get around the windows without using their mouse. That's really important, because that's how your students are going to do it, and or should be doing it, and it'll make you faster too. And then finally, learn to use voiceover as well. You don't have to be an expert, but be able to get into your phone and out of your phone in voiceover and do a few things in there, because you can't teach it if you don't know it. So you've got to learn these things. So I've linked a couple of links there for learning that, but that to me is the best tip ever. So thank you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Janet. And it's such a great segue. So I want to pause and just reflect to all you educators out there. Think of the layers of learning that we're talking about when Diane initially introduced the idea of concept development way back in, you know, pre-K all the way through grade 3, that learning to read and reading to learn, learning tech, and then using tech to learn. These are layers upon layers of skills that we're all using in this webinar with automaticity, right? We're all using with fluency and speed and efficiency. And some of us are maybe have more gray hair than others on this call. But for our high school students trying to compare themselves to their typically sighted peers, it's very hard in some cases for them to understand some of those automaticities that their peers have and the layers of skills behind it when our students with vision impairment may not have ever been introduced to those skills. And that's what brings my passion to this conversation is I understand the depth behind what these students need to learn in order to engage and be effective in the college environment. So to our college folks out there, Cynthia, if we can move to the next screen, one of the ways that we can capture some of these tools, and the next one, these 3 tools that are on this slide, the high school readiness checklist, the college readiness checklist, and technology competencies are all tools that have been developed in the last 4 years based on the work that we've done in College Success. The high school readiness checklist is a project from, if we can go to the next slide, please, that was created by Robin Clark at Utah School for the Blind in response to the college readiness checklist, which I'll get to in a minute. But for those of you who are working with younger students, this is an excellent resource to both help teach the parents as well as the general educators about the layers that we're talking about in this call. Because in order to form a more sophisticated concept, students need more foundational concepts. And so these tools that I'm introducing to you today are ones that are helping scaffold out from the very beginning between Diane's technology and these checklists, really help us understand the layers that a student needs to develop both at home and at school. And if they're only learning it in one environment, it may be difficult for them to generalize to another environment. Executive functioning skills and list making is a superb example of that. You can imagine a parent with a big long list of to-dos or a shopping list sitting on the kitchen counter that they're adding to as they go through their day. That visually is accessible to their child without any explanation. A child can go over and look at the shopping list, however that adult organizes it, and then can infer how they might then generalize that to other parts of their life. A student with low vision or no usable vision may struggle to create that inference or even know that that list exists and how it is organized. And that's what I'm talking about, concept development. These checklists help us concretely introduce those to parents, educators, gen educators, so that they don't just say, oh, little Johnny doesn't have to worry about that. Yes, they do have to worry about that. So this is a great start. If we can go to the next slide, please. The high school readiness checklist is what we created here at College Success that Janet was referring to. This is one that captures some of the expanded core curriculum categories such as independent living skills, technology competencies. We've added academic skills and executive functioning. And I'm going to give you a sample of what that looks like in the next slide. And all of these are being linked in the chat just so that you know. They're ones that are downloadable and then you can use. We encourage you to send folks to the downloadable form so that we can communicate with folks later about other programs that we're doing. But we developed the high school readiness checklist to begin to move the locus of control into the student's voice. I can identify my visual impairment using medical and layman's terms, as well as the causes, social and academic implications, and the stability of my condition. For our DSO friends on this call, I can imagine you may have encountered some students who are very adept at doing that. And you may also have encountered students who have never really had the experience of articulating what their visual impairment is and its implications for their learning and living ever. And it is some of these gaps that if we can utilize some of these checklists earlier, we can both begin to build concepts in our students and our families that they can begin to think in more holistic and robust ways about both their skills and areas that they need to work on to build those skills. So these may be very useful tools that are fully accessible for our students in the downloadable PDF that you all can even use on the college level as you're trying to support students to recognize that perhaps they need to take a gap year and attend a training program that may exist in their area or region to gain additional technology skills, additional independent living skills. This is something I strongly recommend, and in our programming, we certainly coach students to consider that. This puts it in really stark relief about what skills may be assumed, but that no one's talked about with that student. So can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the technology checklist for college readiness we developed for similar reasons. Diane was a wonderful partner in developing this and in really creating really actionable steps in paths to technology to utilize this. The key here is that there are many assessments for to identify the types of technology that may benefit a student with visual impairments or low vision. But there was not really a tool to use to say, so what? Or if I articulate this as my transition goal when I'm 14 years old, how far do I need to go to get to the skills to execute that transition goal effectively? There was no concrete way to say, it's lovely the progress you're making, but you don't know how to type. And to make it very clear, oh yeah, you need to type fluently in order to meet demands of college. You need to be able to select, for example, and use strategies for organizing print and electronic information, perhaps in an electronic format, or to assess reading materials and identify preferred formats on multiple devices. These are skills that if a student has had a paraprofessional their whole life, or an adult or a teacher doing all of that, they may not understand the layers of details that go into creating accessible materials and enter college naively thinking someone else is going to do it. So if we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so for all of you on the higher education side of things, our next rollout is a promising practices guide for disability resource offices. I'm working on this with a small team, and this should be coming out very soon. It really does take a lot of what we've talked about in today's conversation, these realities of living and learning in the K-12 system, some of the gaps that may be there, to help you all demystify why some students may arrive with really robust skills and a great level of success in higher ed, and others who may really be stalled. And we integrate that background, but we also integrate it into the interactive process so that it's really relating to what your day-to-day processes are. We are creating templates for your own planning, not only for academic accommodations, but for accommodations throughout the campus so a student can have access to the entire experience of a college environment, not just perhaps a classroom. We plan to roll out in August 2022. It'll be another downloadable PDF on our website. And we anticipate at some point in the early fall doing a webinar similar to this, introducing it, answering questions, and creating resources for you all from that as well. We did a webinar in August 2021, introducing the general concepts of this and reviewing some of that, and that's on our website too, and we'll put a link to that in our follow-up as well. So I could say so much more about all of this, but I'm going to pause and look at the clock and say, bingo, perfect timing to transition to questions for those of you on the call. This panel is here and ready to answer your questions. So who out there has questions? You can put them in the Q&A or raise your hand, and our team can call on you, or we can just keep talking. You're a quiet crowd. All right.
Leslie, I have a question for Janet.
Oh, please go right ahead.
As people are kind of percolating with their own questions and gearing up their fingers to put them in the Q&A box. Janet, it was really interesting to me that you were talking about the number of students who you've supported in recent years who have gone on to college and reflected back how many of them have actually completed those degrees. For the ones who were the most successful, you noted that they had great Braille skills. When you like have spoken with those students, were there any things that they're telling you that they wish they would have known, or that they felt like they didn't or weren't prepared for in that transition to college?
I do ask that all the time, of course, because I want to, refine what I'm doing to reflect what happens after they leave. So that's a great question. Most of the time they say, thank you so much for all that pushing you did that I didn't really like, but you made me do it. And particularly for the self-advocacy piece. And they're all very strong self-advocates. The students that I have, as I think of them, they were very good at that. And as I think of some of the students I have right now that maybe aren't as good at that, I'm hoping to prepare them, because I know that's a big piece of the success. I think they weren't aware sometimes of the challenges of having to constantly advocate for yourself at the college level, because in the public schools, we're all there, we're a team. We have a team to really work with the kids, and they know we're there, and we have their backs all the time. And I'm sure the accessibility offices are working towards that, but it's a very different level. They have so many more students than we have. In some of my schools, I only have a couple of students, or maybe one in one school and one in another. So, but I still have a team. So, people that can do the work and do the, produce the accessible documents or whatever is needed. So I think that that's the biggest surprise for them is, how much we had been doing behind the scenes and how much they now have to do for themselves. They knew they were going to have to, but they didn't realize, I guess, the breadth of what they're going to be needed to do. And yeah, I would say that's the most important thing for all of them. Interestingly, for those people out there in accessibility offices, my students, when they get their acceptances, we always contact the accessibility offices. Sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's by phone, but the students develop a list of questions to just figure out how that office works. And I had one accessibility office, it was Brandeis actually, that came to our school to see what we did. And that was really cool. And they talked to our web person to see how to make their platform more accessible, because we were playing with it. So I also go on with the students and try to play with the platform if we can, if they've been accepted, so that they can learn that a little bit, because they're pretty daunting, those college, the way the colleges deliver information. And our students mostly only have experience with Google Suite types. And that's great, because now we have that. We didn't have that 10 years ago in the schools. But now all students have had that because of remote learning. And so they are much better at these multi-level platforms and moving around, and where to find your mail, and where to talk to your teacher, and how to submit a, and you have to go through several processes to do that. So that's been a change that's positive. But having that that accessibility office contact us and come was really helpful for the student. And that was a Braille student, and that was a 5th year student. And she did really well in her school and took difficult courses there. So I think that connection between them was really helpful to her. I think the other piece, and I didn't mention this, is around 10th grade, I start, or 9th or 10th grade, I start the students all the students, and I think Diane might have mentioned it, all our kids' reading rates are low.
Mm-hmm.
Even my best Braille students could only read at 200 words per minute. So one of the things I usually do is in 9th grade, ask them to choose one course that they're going to do auditorily, and start training them on that auditory. I've been training them on all along, because if they're on a note taker, I speed up their their speech without them knowing it, or if they're on the computer with this, I know I'm terrible, with a screen reader, I'll speed it up. And so that, by the time they're in high school, they're listening to what you and I can't discriminate at all through their auditory devices. But I make sure every student has auditory devices, they have access to auditory books, and that they start using auditory textbooks in high school and get their reading speeds up, because there's no way, and I would say my low vision students have had the lowest of reading rates because they're struggling with that size, and trying to read large print. So their rates are even lower, and I start them on auditory even sooner, as soon as they've pretty much got grammar under control and their spelling and all that.
Yeah, that reading fluency, you read at a higher level of comprehension when you're reading with greater speed, as long as we check for understanding. Such a key balance of introducing that auditory reading to increase speed for our low vision kids who are struggling with the physical fatigue and the visual fatigue, but they don't want to do it differently. The earlier we can introduce that as a developmentally appropriate, really can raise that vocabulary level. I'm looking at all you higher ed folks out there, that you may be encountering students with suppressed vocabulary, experience reading more complex sentences, deriving greater meaning of more complex reading. If our students haven't had that chance to engage with more complex writing, it is difficult for them to conceptualize more complex sentences and the depth of meaning in a more rich and varied vocabulary. And that you can see that fallout as they enter those freshman writing courses and deal with some of that more robust reading. I'm wondering, Conchita, do you have any thoughts on that as well? I know you work with some college-bound folks too.
Yeah, I mean, I myself am a low vision English learner, college first generation student. And I will say the hardest part was the amount of speed, the amount of reading that you're expected to do when you transition from high school to college is astronomical. We say like for 1 hour that you're in class, you have to do 3 to 5 hours of reading. And so a lot of our low vision kids are not prepared for that. And even if we were to use, large print books, it would take up our whole dorm room. And so that is absolutely kind of a barrier, especially for our students that are English learners. And I say like strategies for English learners are even good for all of our students, because a lot of it is providing that background knowledge ahead of time, reviewing the vocabulary ahead of time, giving a lot of concept development that maybe they didn't have, because for some of our students, because they couldn't see it, and for some of our students, they never experienced it because they didn't grow up here necessarily or get to do some of the like typical American cultural things that a lot of our students have. So providing some of that background context and background knowledge. And someone mentioned earlier this idea of, how our students make that transition from having IEP services to then going on a college campus. And making that balance between I've gotten a question a lot of like, oh, what's the best college for a blind or low vision student to go to? And I really hate that question, because it implies that our students should only be going into certain colleges and our students should only be going into certain majors. And I think that's detrimental to kind of pigeonhole our students that way. And sometimes our students do the best when they don't have great disability services. It really depends. It has a lot to do with, did they learn those self-advocacy skills in high school? Did they learn how to navigate on their own? I'm a huge proponent as well of one of the things mentioned earlier about taking a gap year for training. I did my undergrad with no training, and I was miserable. I did not know how to navigate my campus. I did not know how to read my textbooks. And so once I took the time to take training, intense training that really transformed my life and my educational career, and my master's degree, I was able to do it, and I'm currently doing my doctorate, and it's 1,000 times easier than my undergrad because I have the resources and the know-how. So I think disability offices should absolutely do an effort to do better and to serve our students, but we also have to serve our students so that we prepare them in case that robust structure doesn't exist, and not pigeonhole them into certain schools that may have better disability support services.
That's so terrific, Conchita. Thank you so much. And I hope by now you can see the method to our madness in assembling the team that we had today. That Diane's discussion about the need to start early and build those skills, to build that independence, that locus of control, that self-determination as students begin to choose to access the information they desire to access, helps create that motivation, that curiosity, that fund of knowledge. It reduces the reliance on adults and other folks in their orbit to create those materials. And those are the skills, that problem solving, that resilience that we need to help them consider the range of options in their post-secondary planning, whether that is to consider work, whether it is to consider work, then some sort of college training program. Training can mean two things: blindness skills training and career training. And I want to be sure that you folks understand there's a distinction there, but as well as to pursue degrees. So Annie's putting the future webinars coming up. But what you can see is we're dealing with some complex issues here. If you on the higher ed side are working with students who may benefit from additional blindness skills training, please reach out to us and we can support you. The College Readiness resource that's been posted in the chat has a great deal of material written to that. In fact, we have a whole article, Conchita, on why we don't have a top 10 schools for students with vision impairment. As a college counselor, I couldn't celebrate what you said more. And because there just simply isn't. Our students deserve to pursue schools that are a match for their interests, their curiosities, and their readiness to take on the next level. And part of what we're trying to do is create a much richer playing field and a more even playing field so they can consider all of those options, whatever they may be. So with that, it's 5:32 and we're over time. So what I'm gonna do is wrap this for today, encourage any continued conversation with anyone on this call now, or to those of you who listen to recordings of this. We are here to maintain this conversation, and we really believe that we have to speak across different stakeholder groups to improve these outcomes. Each one of these folks come from different stakeholder groups and bring a really broad, rich background to begin to solve these very complex, wicked problems. So we're here to create good stuff. Thank you for sticking with us this whole time. To the team on the background, making all the posts work and screen shares work. And to our panelists for creating their wonderful slides and bringing their extraordinary wisdom to this conversation. It's very exciting to have you all here, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks at our next webinar. So have a great night, everyone. Goodbye.